Being a fan of the Paper Mario series over the years has been quite the roller coaster ride. Admittedly, in terms of actual game quality, it's one of those coasters you'd make in Roller Coaster Tycoon where there'd be a quick incline, a moment of soaring through the air, and then a plummet directly into the ground. But at least from an emotional standpoint, there have been plenty of ups and downs. The most violent this coaster had ever been, though, was in mid-2020. 2020 was crazy for its own reasons as well, but Nintendo sure did its part to make that as tumultuous as possible for me. And it all started with this. No, you're not going crazy, and to my knowledge this is still reality, but yeah, out of the blue in the middle of May 2020, Nintendo announced the newest game in the beloved Paper Mario series via a tweet. I had a lot of things going through my mind when this happened, but almost all of them were negative. My opinions on the Paper Mario series as a whole were basically at its lowest point thanks to Sticker Star and Color Splash, so I felt like this announcement was Nintendo effectively giving up on the series. A franchise that would have taken center stage at E3 less than a decade prior now doesn't even deserve an announcement in a direct, which had only happened 2 months prior. And the message, to me at least, was crystal clear. We don't care about this, and neither should you. And that really did poison the well, at least directly after the announcement. From what I saw in the trailers, it did seem like this was going to be a step in the right direction, and they seemingly took a lot of the previous criticisms to heart. Things were gone, the world was fully interconnected, the battle system had seen that complete overhaul I wanted, even partners were back. But I could never fully get on board, because Nintendo would never treat a game they knew was going to be great so disrespectfully, would they? There had to be a catch. Something that would completely ruin everything hiding under the flourishes of the trailers, so I remained very skeptical. And while I did hold on to that skepticism up to the release, the more I saw, the more I was beginning to get on board. Then the interviews started coming out, and any possible optimism I had towards the game immediately disappeared. We'll get into those a little later on though. Regardless, reading what they had to say, on top of me already not being fully sold, any goodwill the game had been building was gone. I, of course, still bought it on day one and played it all the way through, but more than ever, I was hyper fixated on what the game wasn't, and more importantly, what it wasn't allowed to be. And with that being basically my only focus, on top of most of the gameplay ideas not really landing as well as I'd hoped they would, I didn't like the game at all, and haven't touched it since that first playthrough back in July 2020. But now we're more than 2 years removed from all that, and I feel like, just like with Color Splash, I'm in a bit of a better headspace now to have a look at this game and examine it a bit more rationally. So, let's take a look at Paper Mario the Origami King and see if it really is the newest good one, or if my frustrations in my first playthrough were as correct as I thought. To be completely honest, I do think the intro is pretty great, all things considered. It's not perfect, but there clearly is a lot of effort in its setting, cinematography, and overall feel. The game definitely tries to set a clear tone here. Mario and Luigi are invited by Peach to attend an origami festival, which is a thing, I guess, and when they reach Toad Town, it's been completely deserted for some reason. Upon entering the castle, the brothers are locked in, and Mario is confronted by a folded up origami version of Peach, and right away we've got our first missed opportunity. Origami Peach asks Mario a few questions, some join me and we can rule the galaxy sort of stuff. In some previous games, you could agree and you'd be greeted with a gag. But Origami King doesn't let you have any fun like this. Come on, Peach, let me join you. I do want to silence the Toads forever. But no, regardless of your answers, you just get dropped into a pit and locked in a prison. It's here that we meet our companion for this game, Olivia. We grab a hammer, free her from behind a wall using a mechanic so boring it's not even worth talking about, and move on. It's here that we catch a glimpse of how regular paper people are transformed into origami, and it's implied to be a painful, gruesome, horrifying process that removes their free will and turns them into mindless soldiers. After this horrifying display, Mario rescues Bowser, who's here too, and has been folded up seemingly permanently, and once they reach the outside, they all meet the game's main villain, Ollie, who introduces himself and announces his evil plans. Mario, Olivia, and Bowser all escape the castle as it's lifted up by a bunch of streamers and carried off to the top of a tall mountain. And in the shuffle, Mario and Olivia fall down into a forest. I've gotta say, Peach's castle being lifted away to keep Mario out is so 2001. But for real, I do like the nod to the original's opening here. And with that, we've got our main goal. With Peach's castle lifted up to the top of a mountain and covered by streamers, Mario and Olivia will need to travel the world to destroy these streamers and find a way to reach the castle to save Peach from the evil King Ollie. This is a decent setup. We've got a unique villain, the first one in 13 years, and the streamers are a decent way to start a globe-trotting adventure. Beyond the castle, the intro is kind of just okay. As Mario makes his way back to Toad Town through one of several dance parties, Olivia gives him a bag of confetti which he can use to fill in holes in the world. This mechanic is basically identical to painting in colorless spots from Color Splash, well, with one difference. They do still give you coins when you fill them in, and they can activate damaged mechanisms once they've been fully repaired. However, these are actual pitfalls Mario can fall into and take damage from, so they are a bit more dangerous, and Mario's confetti will run out much quicker than his paint did. Mario's confetti bag does get bigger throughout the game, but it never really feels like he has any more, since the empty spots get bigger as you progress as well. It doesn't increase through battling though, it's just a set upgrade after every streamer. It's a slight downgrade overall in my opinion. Anyways, once Mario makes it back into town, we find out what's been causing these holes, and these things show themselves. These are called paper macho enemies, and man, they're so boring. They're just regular Mario enemies made out of paper mache, and Mario will need to fight them in the overworld to defeat them, not in any traditional RPG battles. I feel like they could have been kind of fun if they were interesting or properly varied, or could like do things, but for the most part all they do is charge in Mario's general direction, then stop, allowing Mario to hit their weak point with his hammer. Once that weak point is gone, Mario can just hit them anywhere after their attack invincibility wears off and easily dispatch them. Aside from the few bosses, these aren't really any fun on their own, and I kind of feel like the fact that Mario was fighting against a new type of paper thing was supposed to be the fun. Like, wow, it's a paper mache in a origami game. How unique and different. And I guess on that note, it is time we brought up the origami elephant in the room. Yes, I did fold this myself, by the way. The first 4 games in the series all had a storybook intro, and while this was first abandoned in Color Splash, that change really had its biggest effect here. All those prior games happened within the pages of a storybook, so it made sense that there would be some paper sensibilities and imagery. But they were first and foremost stories, so the paper aspects were kept relatively minor. It was the spice, not the meal. Abandoning that framing did allow the developers to go ham with any papery gimmick they could find, but on the other hand, it let them go ham with any papery gimmick they could find. Origami King in particular feels like the point where the paper aspect stopped being a facet of the game and a delivery method for mechanics, and engulfed the entire experience, becoming the whole point of the game. In Sticker Star, the stickers existed to facilitate the new battle system along with the paperize mechanic, and Color Splash's focus on color allowed it to really get creative with its environments. But Origami King's paper gimmicks feel haphazard, like they were just included because it's a Paper Mario game and it needed paper. Like, what do origami, paper mache, and confetti have to do with each other? And it's all such a focus that I feel like the game loses track of what made it Paper Mario. This isn't a Mario world that happens to have paper. This is a paper world that happens to have Mario. Everything here is made out of paper. The ground you walk on, the landscape, the items you find, even the sun in the sky is just a piece of paper that could very easily be cut out, leaving the world in complete darkness. And this is all completely diegetic too. Every living being in this world is consciously aware of the fact that they are paper, and I don't really understand it. Like, what are the creation myths in this universe? Was there a great paper craftsman in the sky that glued everything together, or do people just accept that this completely unnatural material is the foundation for everything and has been for eternity? Now, I know, don't think too much into it. The developers just thought it would be fun to write some jokes that involved paper, and being a sequel, it needed to be bigger and better than its predecessor. I get it, I really do, but it kind of breaks the world world. In order to get invested in a fictional world, it has to be grounded in something and make some sort of sense, even if that sense is completely separate from our idea of it. And because most of the previous games were just stories, very obviously not a reality, they were very easily able to sidestep this sort of existential issue. How does a world made of paper exist? Well, it doesn't matter, it's just a story. But Origami King can't get away with it because it drops that important framing device, and since it plants its flag so firmly within concepts that only exist in our reality, it can't separate itself from those questions. And unfortunately, that isn't necessarily something that the team at Intelligent Systems actually wanted to do. Just before the game was released, a few members of the Origami King development team participated in an interview discussing the game, its development, and its concept. I don't even think I can really express how reading this interview made me feel. There's a lot of things that are, let's say, less than great about this interview, but of course, there's one question and answer that really sticks out and sheds way too much light on the state of the Paper Mario franchise over the last 10 years. It reads as follows. Mario is famous for its iconic cast of villains. Can you talk about the new villain in this game and how you design a character to stand alongside all-time greats like Bowser and Kamek? Since Paper Mario Sticker Star, it's no longer possible to modify Mario characters or to create original characters that touch on the Mario universe. That means if we aren't using Mario characters for bosses, we need to create original characters with designs that don't involve the Mario universe at all, like we've done with Ollie and the stationary bosses. Oh man, just reading that makes me angry. He really said the quiet part out loud, didn't he? This interview confirmed all the fears and reservations I had about the modern Paper Mario series. Paper Mario's world, characters, and stories haven't been getting simpler and less interesting because the developers don't know how to put a hat on a toad or put a name in a text box. They literally are not allowed to do it. I'm not going to speculate on who in Nintendo's upper management doesn't want anything interesting to exist in the Paper Mario franchise. Miyamoto. But regardless of who's pulling the strings, the results are the same. The personality and charm that made the first two games timeless classics and gave Super the most engaging narrative in the entire Mario universe has been deemed so unnecessary and damaging that they're not even allowed to implement them. And suddenly, everything that this series had become since Super all makes perfect sense. Sticker Star's bland, pointless everything, Color Splash's struggles against its own structure and slight attempts to sneak back something that resembles a narrative, and of course, Origami King's huge focus on wringing everything they possibly can out of the paper gimmick, it all falls into place. Paper Mario didn't turn from one of the most interesting, thoughtful, and fun series in the Mario franchise into just another dull spin-off due to a purposeful direction shift dead set on abandoning everything that made the series good. The team at Intelligent Systems was forbidden from implementing any of the things that they wanted to in order to give these games any character or charm. The catalog of concepts and ideas they were able to pull from basically stopped at Super Mario World, and any of the vast richness that happened beyond that or could be added by talented artists was simply not allowed. The worlds created in the first three games that helped make them what they are were in an instant made something negative, something that could hurt the integrity of the Mario series. And that's also why all the unique characters in the last few games were just regular human things that had no connection to Mario, because that's all they were allowed to implement. Kirsty was a sticker, Huey was a paint can, and Olivia is origami. All three of these are real-life things that have no connection to the Mario universe and have no real way to make any lasting impact on it. That has to be why things were included as well, since adding new super moves for Mario to use risks expanding the Mario universe in a way that Paper Mario is not allowed to. And what's even more frustrating about this whole thing is that this seems to be a problem exclusive to the Paper Mario series. Obviously, the main Mario series is allowed to do whatever the heck they want, be that put Mario in a city with real humans, put him up against a Dark Souls dragon, or in a land of low polygon food. Even the Mario sports games, the peak of creative bankruptcy in the series of late, gets new costumes and can do some interesting things, but oh, you want to give that Goomba a hat? Oh, you can't do that. Think of the purity of the Mario franchise. Do you want Mario to die? Well then keep that Goomba as bland and generic as possible. Oh, and don't even get me started on the stationary bosses. What, you want cool original boss fights to make the final encounters of an area fun and climactic? Well, too bad. All our boss designers got to work with was a $15 Staples gift card. But we gave the bosses wacky accents, so that's just as good as making a real character, right? Okay, I went off on a bit of a rant there, I'm sorry. It just boggles the mind to even think that anyone could think this was a good idea. I understand the idea that limitations breed creativity, but that idiom falls apart when the thing that you're limiting is creativity. Technical limitations can lead to creative solutions to difficult problems. Creative limitations can't really solve new problems. They force people to use older, simpler ideas, resulting in something inherently lesser. And that really stings, because yes, you can definitely tell that Intelligent Systems is fighting tooth and nail to get something interesting here, and they even managed to pull it off somewhat every once in a while with its narrative and its presentation. And on a pure visual level, it does look really good. The artists at Intelligent Systems were able to use the Switch's relative power over the Wii U to really do everything they could to make the environments as detailed and polished as possible. The textures are super realistic, the structures and sprites look good, and of course, the origami models are fantastic and really feel like true origami versions of Mario enemies. But since I'm on a roll of negative opinions here, I'm gonna lay out another one right away. I kinda think Color Splash looks better. Now, just a little bit, and that's primarily for technical reasons, not artistic ones. I do like Color Splash's approach to color more, but that was kind of its whole thing. Of course it's gonna have the advantage there. In my opinion, Color Splash, on top of its really good color use, absolutely perfected the paper aesthetic for the series, so moving on to the next game, there really wasn't that much room to grow, at least in the textures and modeling. Origami King's visuals lean a lot more heavily into more advanced lighting techniques and effects, which in a vacuum is a great thing. The paper textures are already very realistic, adding more realistic lighting can only improve that, and yeah, it does, but not without its own cost. For some reason, Nintendo hates the idea of anti-aliasing on basically all of their Switch games, and that makes a big impact here. While the game is far more technically impressive than Color Splash, almost all of the benefits of that are sacrificed due to the overall image clarity being far lower, thanks to an almost universal jag on everything. Where Color Splash looked smooth and polished, Origami King in comparison looks compromised, like it's trying to push the Switch too hard and suffering the consequences. Let me be perfectly clear here, this is not an issue exclusive to Origami King. Most of Nintendo's games end up looking super jaggy relative to almost any non-Nintendo game on the Switch, but it does have the same effect. A game that really can't put its best foot forward visually, since it's hampering its own style by trying too much and not doing anything to clean up that final image. Thankfully, no compromises were necessary on the audio side of things, and yeah, sixth verse the same as the first 5. The sound design is pretty simple but quite charming. I especially like the sounds that Olivia makes when she talks and moves around. Really great. And yes, the soundtrack is quite good. The composition is well done and themes fit areas really well. Tracks like Shogun Studios, and The Great Sea, are both super charming and make exploring each of these areas more fun than they would be otherwise. However, I do have to take some umbrage with the battle music. The main battle themes are all great and even slightly change based on the area you're in, which is a really nice touch. However, and I need to word this carefully, I kinda feel like some of the boss themes don't really fit with the whole Paper Mario vibe. Tracks like the Sumo Bros boss fight, or Dual-Bladed Duelist, wouldn't sound out of place in Final Fantasy or Xenoblade, but in Paper Mario, where the battle themes have traditionally been a bit quirkier and had more levity to them, the chuggy metal guitars and overly epic production is a bit much. These are among my favorite songs in the game, and even the series on their own though, and to be fair, it could just be that I think A Pair of Scissors doesn't deserve such an awesome theme. But yeah, this soundtrack is overall super great and stands toe-to-toe with all of the others in the series. I probably couldn't even rank them if I was told to. It'd be kind of like choosing a favorite child. They're all just so great in so many different ways, and it's been a treat to see how the music of the Paper Mario series has evolved over the years. But yeah, I think in terms of presentation, I am going to have to put Origami King a bit below Color Splash, but that's still really high praise. Color Splash was a 10 out of 10 in that area, and Origami King is still a solid 9. But even beyond the presentation, Origami King definitely does some things really well, far better than its direct predecessor, starting with its structure and world. Unlike Super, Sticker Star, and Color Splash, Origami King returns to the first two games' world style of having no direct level select, and having the world be for the most part interconnected. It's still nowhere near as organically set up as the first two games, as areas 1 to 3 and 4 to 6 are all linearly connected. This means that aside from Autumn Mountain being the exception, all areas beyond the first in a chain can only be directly accessed from Toad Town with pipes in a world select room. So we're not fully back to that original style, but it is a huge step in the right direction and makes exploring, along with simply progressing through the game, so much more rewarding, since areas can do more than simply go from point A to point B. There certainly still is a lot of going from point A to point B in order to progress, specifically for the first two streamers. They are both fine, it's not like they're terrible, but I can definitely feel the DNA of the previous games in them. You could very easily divide many of the sections of these two streamers up into individual Color Splash levels and you wouldn't bat an eye. At this point in my first playthrough, I was very worried that any interconnectivity the world had would be purely for show, like they just edited out the map screen transitions in Color Splash and hoped we wouldn't notice. Which makes the third area so much more fantastic by comparison. Scorching Sandpaper Desert and its surrounding areas are by far my favorite location in the game, and honestly, if someone put it at the top of their favorite chapters in Paper Mario in general, I could easily see why. It's kinda got it all, a huge open area filled with real exploration and discovery, some fun puzzles to open its two pretty great dungeons, and an actual town with people in it who aren't toads! At least when you first get there. I genuinely love how this streamer is set up. You pretty quickly learn where the streamer leads deep underground, and from there it's really just up to you to figure out how to get there. You'll explore the desert, finding artifacts that hold importance to the ancient architecture, read ancient scripts that detail rituals to summon their deity, and use abilities you've gained along with things you've collected to find your way into the place where the streamer is held. And of course, the fact that tying it all together is an actual town with people to talk to and places to visit elevates this part even more. Now, I wouldn't call Sniff City as meaningful or fun to explore as Toad Town or Rogueport, but it's a robust enough area with enough importance to the plot of the streamer as a whole, and has enough interesting things to find and interact with that it is a real highlight. Of course, it would be a lot more interesting if the inhabitants weren't just the same, like one snippet copy-pasted and color-swapped about, but you know, Nintendo would have to immediately shutter their studios if something like that was allowed, so we get snippets. Do I sound bitter? I don't think I'm bitter. Anyways, after the boss of the area is beaten and the sun shines on the desert again, we do get an actual unique character. Sort of? A professor that's been excavating some ruins in the area is searching for an ancient captain that once roamed the area, whom he calls Captain Toad. By some remarkable luck, Mario and the unnamed professor actually finds him and defrosts him. After being revived, he calls himself Captain T-Ode. I'm gonna be petty here and veto this as a unique name because it's literally just Captain Toad but spelled like a Paper Mario name. The captain here is actually super important because he's our key to accessing the majority of the fourth streamer's area, the Great Sea. So I'm a fan of a lot of Nintendo's games, and I do generally love when games reference others, especially ones that mean a lot to me. It's a joy to see a developer put little nods to things they like in games they make, and Origami King has done this pretty well already in the second streamer's dungeon, Shogun Studios. It was really cute to see the DK and Samus masks. They were fun little references that are easy to notice, but don't take any focus away from the core experience. However, the Great Sea in Origami King is a very rare example of taking this way too far, well into can I borrow your homework sort of territory. When you get out into the sea with the captain, he gives you a map. The Great Sea is split into a 7x7 square with a bunch of small islands in between. There's a bunch of interesting stuff here. The toads on the islands will give you sea charts that will show you where some sunken treasure is for you to gather. You'll have to participate in trials to test your power, wisdom, and courage to gain magical orbs. And with those orbs, you'll have to enter a great tower that will test you with some more puzzles, after completing which you'll be able to ascend it and unlock the next area. Yeah, it's just Wind Waker. To be perfectly clear, I love that they're homaging Wind Waker so thoroughly. The fact that they would make like 15% of their entire game one big love letter to my favorite Zelda game warms the old frozen heart. And it is a ton of fun to sail around in the Great Sea, pulling up sunken treasure, finding the goddess pearls, and even climbing this version of the Tower of the Gods. But that's kind of the problem. They made 15% of their entire game a big reference to another game, a hugely better one in my opinion. I can't explore this game's version of Wind Waker's Sea without just wanting to be playing Wind Waker. The homage is incredibly well done and very thorough, but the fact that it is so thorough really brings these direct comparisons onto itself, and Origami King simply can't win this battle. Alright, I'm really starting to lean back into the negativity here, and I swear I'm not trying to. There really is a lot to like in this section, a lot that I like, but it really needed a bit more of its own identity. There's even a ton of important narrative stuff here, but in order to get into that, I think we need to back up a bit. The first two games in the second half of the Paper Mario series were incredibly light on story and characterization. Sticker Star had essentially none, and while Color Splash had a bit more in terms of smaller scale plots, there was still very little in terms of actual characters. Huey was fun, but very static, and beyond him, everything else was basically just one-liners attached to Toads. And with the restrictions put on the series, it's easy to see why they did that. So it's actually pretty strange to see that Origami King actually does a heck of a lot more with its characters and story. Pretty early on, just beyond the first streamer, Mario and Olivia meet this Bob-omb. After some small talk, he agrees to travel with them for the time being. He's our first travel companion. Now, just to nip this in the bud, no, he isn't a partner in the same way that the first two games had. He and all the other traveling companions Mario gets throughout this adventure are all relatively self-contained within their original areas, are all essentially useless in battle, always sit out all dungeons, and only one of them has any direct use outside of battles. From a game design standpoint, you could cut them completely and the game wouldn't change at all, but they do help to liven up these individual areas. I've already talked about the Toad Professor, who helps Mario excavate things in the desert, and Captain Toad, who allows Mario to use a submarine to get sunken treasure, but the most important one is this Bob-omb. Olivia takes a liking to him right away and makes sure to give him a nickname because he's not allowed to have an official one. Bobby, as he's come to be known, really helps balance things out. Olivia is super optimistic and excitable, very understandable for reasons I'll get into shortly, but Bobby here is more laid back and a bit more pragmatic. That's partially because he's lost all his memories. That's one of the reasons he joins up with Mario to see if traveling the world will help him regain those lost memories. But the other reason he's a bit more go with the flow, I find, is much more engaging, and I think it's this interesting entirely by accident. In this universe, when a Bob-omb explodes, it dies, and Bob-ombs are made to explode. That leaves them in a really weird position where if they want to do what they were born to do, they have to give up their lives or continue on unfulfilled. Their existences are kind of built upon existential nihilism, where they recognize that their lives have no inherent value on their own. It's their actions that give their lives meaning. And that brings us to just past the second streamer. Mario, Olivia, and Bobby have reached the outskirts of the scorching sandpaper desert and are about to make their way into it when Ollie arrives and traps Olivia under a giant boulder. There's no way Mario can move this rock, but Bobby has a trick up his proverbial sleeve. He and Mario head out to the Great Sea to the Princess Peach cruise liner, and after an easy but admittedly kinda fun boss fight, retrieve something special to him. Once they return, Bobby shares his story of how he lost his memories, how Mario helped him get them back, and how they're going to save Olivia. A long time ago, Bobby lost his best friend, and as a keepsake, kept his fuse on him until the day he lost his memory. This is how he's going to save Olivia. Every Bob-omb just wants to make an impact. And with one final blast, the boulder is cleared, Olivia is free, but Bobby is gone. Olivia's grief and guilt at Bobby's sacrifice is incredibly well done. Once she realizes what's happened, she loses all composure and runs away. When Mario finds her, she's inconsolable and won't even move. Mario can't just raise his hand in her general direction once and she's suddenly over his death. Now, obviously this is a video game and we can't have characters grieving over the deaths of their friends in any realistic time frame, but I'm genuinely surprised at how straight this whole section is portrayed. It's never joked about, and the only real levity comes from talking with some Monty moles that live in the cave. This sort of emotional storytelling has only really happened a couple times before, and while I think Bobbery's Tragedy and Blumiere and Timpani's Tale are better, the fact that there's even a comparison is a huge compliment. And it's not even something that is just seen once and forgotten about. Olivia is taken aback later on in the game when they meet a bunch of other Bob-ombs, which does lead me to something odd with this whole thing. Mario and Olivia spend a good time grieving over Bobby, but in this later section, they're both more than happy to send dozens of Bob-ombs to their deaths as soon as it's needed. And I get it, Bobby was the one that they knew, the one that mattered. All these other Bob-ombs that look identical and have the same name and voice are inconsequential. But if Bobby was a full person with his own unique life and experiences, shouldn't we assume that all the other ones are as well? I know that Nintendo wasn't thinking about the philosophical implications of Bob-omb death in their game, and I probably shouldn't either, but it really makes the whole Bobby situation really odd, to the point of almost feeling manipulative. Like, oh, feel bad for this Bob-omb, but this one's an NPC, just let him die. And it really only wrote itself into this corner because it decided that explosions kill Bob-ombs, which is not how things worked in previous games, at least the first two. They could have easily avoided this entire scenario if Bobby had to use some dangerous, super powerful gunpowder to destroy the boulder, or if the defining visual of him was a big crack or something instead of a missing fuse, implying that he was somehow more fragile than your average Bob-omb. But instead, it decided to open this can of worms, forcing people to just not think about any of the narrative or philosophical implications of its world in order to fully appreciate it, which I suppose is very on brand. But enough about that, let's talk about Olivia and why she's arguably my favorite companion character in the entire series. She's so great. She's cheerful, curious, always happy to meet new people and try new things, and she's always determined to do the right thing. Obviously, she's not just a one-note character either, she has a full gamut of emotions and experiences them all fully. Bobby's death proved that, but beyond that, she likes to sing, is interested in anything people have to say, and she'd spend her entire life in a hot tub if she could. It feels like it's the first time she's seeing this world along for the ride with the player, because she pretty much is. In the Great Sea, we learn about her origin, how Ollie himself folded Olivia using a secret technique to bring her to life, which I think technically would make him her father, not her brother. She's excited to have all these new experiences because they truly are new to her. But this origin also adds a lot of personal stakes to the adventure and gives Olivia the drive to see it all through. The one causing all the destruction in the Mushroom Kingdom is her family, and she has to be the one to try to reach out and get him to stop. There's no way he'd listen to anyone else. For the first time in the modern series, it feels like the game actually has a true character to help drive the story forward, and that's super important because Mario, as a silent protagonist, really can't do that himself. He's always had to rely on his partners or other companions to be that driving force, to be the narrative anchor. So it's really great to finally, truly have one that matches, if not exceeds, the first three games. Speaking of other characters, just like Sticker Star and Color Splash, Origami King is filled to the brim with toads, who will be the primary NPCs you'll find throughout the game. Color Splash tried to differentiate these toads through writing. While it certainly didn't break any new ground in terms of characterization, at the very least, giving all these toads small little quips whenever you found them helped out the game's humor, making it, in my opinion, the funniest game in the series. Origami King continues that general idea, but I feel like it misses the mark, at least compared to Color Splash's iteration. Not only in writing, the scenarios these toads are in and the dialogue they have isn't nearly as entertaining as it was in Color Splash, but also in terms of the gameplay. Color Splash had a bunch of toads to be found, and especially for the rescue team toads, for the most part each toad's situation was fairly unique. Like, you wouldn't rescue the same type of toad in the exact same way in multiple levels, you know what I mean? It added a bit of variety, and along with the really funny dialogue, made finding these toads, especially those mandatory ones, not quite a soul-crushing experience. Origami King decided that more is more in this regard. There are over 400 toads to find throughout Origami King, and this quantity over quality focus led to a few different issues. One I've already talked about: when there's hundreds of toads and they each need a line of dialogue, it's way harder to make that unique or interesting, but also you can't really have 400 unique toad finding solutions in the game. So as you move through the world, you'll see a lot of toads that are saved in the exact same way, many of them found in the exact same location. There are some unique ones, and if there were fewer toads but they were all unique like this, I think I'd like finding them a lot more. Also, unlike Color Splash, technically all of these toads are optional, so if you want, you can just choose to leave them all folded, which is a small mercy to me since I don't really care about full completion here. There are a few that you want to save in particular, like this one that will tell you the location of HP up hearts. Saving toads does help you in battle, which I'll get into in a little bit, and the toads that you do save act as a currency for the art gallery, which is nice, but after a while I just felt that the second or two it took to save the toad was more valuable to me than whatever meager reward the toad would give. I guess maybe if they were more interesting to save instead of basically just hitting something with a hammer, they'd be better. I don't really think Koroks were that fun to save on their own in Breath of the Wild, but on top of them often requiring fun little mini-games that fit well with what you were already doing, the rewards they gave were invaluable. I think a similar solution would have been better here too. Have fewer toads in more unique scenarios, and give proper rewards for saving them as well. If saving toads increased your weapon slots, we'd be having a very different conversation. That would actually make them fairly analogous to Koroks. Start Mario with 0 and have the first toad give you a slot for new boots and say, hey, keep saving toads and we'll keep giving you more slots. And boom, you've got a collectathon mechanic that directly ties into a meaningful-ish part of the battle system and actively encourages players to find more. I really think this sort of thing was needed, since aside from trying to avoid battles and filling in holes, finding toads is going to be the main thing you'll be doing when just walking around. There are some small puzzles and quests that you need to do in order to progress as well, which involve items that aren't things. This really isn't a big deal, but honestly, having items that you find in the world or get from people that help with your quest really does help with connecting with that world, even if they do only have that one application, unlike things. And it really does help the game feel a bit more like an RPG than Sticker Star or Color Splash did outside of battles. And since we're already sort of talking about it, I guess I can't avoid battles anymore. I genuinely don't know where to begin with Origami King's battle system. It's actually kind of incredible. Intelligent Systems managed to make this the simplest, least strategic, least rewarding, and most unnecessary in the entire series, while simultaneously giving it the most moving parts and making it by far the most convoluted and hardest to understand. Because of this convolution, I think I'm going to have to segment this a bit more than I usually do and discuss it as a whole once I've gone through everything individually. So forgive me if it seems like I'm forgetting anything as I go. I guarantee I'll get to it. So I think it's probably fitting to start with the newest addition to Paper Mario's combat and Origami King's defining mechanic, the ring system. Like I said, I was pretty interested in seeing what this mechanic would end up being like, because it seemed like a genuine step away from its direct predecessors was the revamp I was hoping to see in the combat, and could have offered a lot of fun in and of itself. And as I started playing it for the first time, I actually started to think that this may be the saving grace Paper Mario needed to have fun, interesting gameplay again. That impression didn't last very long. The ring system is a really cool idea in theory that completely collapses under its own weight in practice. When you start a battle, Mario will be put into the center of a ring, and a bunch of enemies, always a multiple of 4, will be arranged in various squares within the ring's 4 rows and 12 columns. From this, you're given the instruction to line them up, and that is the goal of the ring. Each turn of battle is effectively a small puzzle where you need to use a limited amount of ring moves, either a turn or a slide, to get all of the enemies in battle properly arranged so Mario can attack. But how do you line them up properly? Well, the game explains that there are two different formations you're aiming to get. One with enemies lined up in a 4x1 line, which lets Mario jump on each one successively. And the second, a 2x2 square, puts all of Mario's enemies in range for a hammer swing. These are the only two solutions, and I personally find this to be kinda boring and tediously easy. The way Origami King sets up its battles, every single puzzle you're faced with is guaranteed to be solvable with the amount of moves you're given in one turn, and since there are only two possible solutions, which are very different, it's typically really easy to recognize what you need to do. While yes, it does get a bit more difficult throughout the game, it'll throw more enemies at you and occasionally require moves that are a bit more esoteric, once you recognize what you can do with the ring, the puzzles end up being far more tedious, less like a puzzle and more like busy work than I imagine the developers intended. And that's not even mentioning the fact that there are only so many puzzle setups, so a lot of the time you'll end up seeing puzzles you've literally already solved before. And the worst thing a puzzle game can do, aside from having bad puzzles, is one-to-one reuse of those puzzles. I really wish that they didn't have every puzzle fully solvable in one turn. If they made it so, say, only two groups of three could be lined up, with some having a secret harder solution for all of them, which the game sort of already does, then there may have been some room to strategize and plan out which enemies will be the biggest threat and thus will need to be eliminated first. It would also improve some other aspects of the battle system we'll get into later. As it stands, if you can solve these puzzles, it really doesn't matter what the enemy makeup is. Once you've solved the ring, all enemies are effectively the same, just an action command press to take them out. But what if, unlike me, you're not a puzzle game aficionado and do end up struggling against these more difficult puzzles? Well, then Origami King has you more than covered. Olivia can give you little hints to guide you towards the intended solution, which is perfectly fine, and if you need more time to get the old gears turning, you can buy more time, up to 1.5 minutes of it. These are both totally fine ways to aid a player if they're struggling to get a lineup, but why would you spend 1,000 coins to get a ton of thinking time when you could just spend that money to have the gameplay itself? Yeah, on top of the other player aids for the ring, at any time you can just press and hold Y to give your money to the countless toads spectating in the stands surrounding the ring, which will fill up as you find them in the overworld. If you give them enough, they will do ring moves for you, and they're always the correct ones. You can give them 500 to do all but one move, letting you solve the final, easiest move on your own, or if you really want to make it rain, you can toss a full 1,000 coins at them, and not only will they solve the entire puzzle, they'll do some damage to the enemies and give you an item of some kind as well. I hate that this is even a thing. What's the point in making a game if you're going to encourage players to literally pay to bypass its primary mechanic? If your mechanic is so obtuse, so poorly designed, and such a roadblock that there will be people that literally think not playing is the best solution, you have failed at making a game. It's just so frustrating. The previous two games' combat was so poorly designed and tedious that I actively attempted to avoid them, and going into this one, seeing people didn't want to play their games, instead of realizing that they should maybe, I don't know, make a good system people would want to play, they instead came to the conclusion that if people are going to hate their bad game, they should at least make it easier for them to not have to play it. Honestly, I don't mind puzzle assistants like these toads as an accessibility option. What really frustrates me is that it's by far the best option if you're having any trouble with the puzzles at all. If the toads were far more expensive than buying time, say one move solved for 1,500, two for 3,000, but never being able to fully solve it, that'd be an alright solution for those who desperately need it, but it wouldn't invalidate buying extra time for people who, without the pay-to-win option, would be more likely to actually try to solve them. And we're not even done with the ring yet. Bosses in Origami King use the ring system in a completely different way, and it's way more interesting to talk about because of it, because it's effectively a completely different battle system. When these get started, rather than Mario being in the center, it's the boss taking that spot and Mario will be on the outside. And rather than enemies being placed to line up, the board will now be populated by various symbols. The goal of these rings are to use the arrows to guide Mario around the ring, to reach the boss and and attack it. On top of Mario's regular attacks, he'll be able to use other symbols which will let him use his thousandfold arms to wallop on the bosses, or use various Velumental attacks for different effects. I feel like Origami King's battle system is by far at its best during these boss fights, because not only do they use the ring in a more interesting way, making you think about your path through the rings, but also have unique gimmicks that throw a wrench into entire plans for them. Some will immobilize certain rows, force Mario down specific paths, litter the ring with obstacles that Mario can't move through, stuff like that. They all add a sense of variety to this combat that is completely absent from the regular battles and made me really look forward to each one. Now, some of these bosses are not my favorite things ever for reasons I've already ranted about, but some, specifically the Velumentals, are really great overall. My favorite is actually the Fire Velumental, which may be a hot take, and to be honest, its direct manipulation of the rings is very minimal. It will throw its fiery feathers onto individual squares, and if Mario walks over them, he'll take a ton of damage, especially since the more feathers there are, the more damage he takes. As Mario deals more damage to it, more feathers will drop, and once all of them are gone, it will be defeated. Beating this boss comes down to smart pathing through the feathers to minimize damage and keep the Velumental immobile and vulnerable as often as possible, while not enraging it, causing it to call back all of its feathers, putting the boss fight back to square one. But there are problems that pop up that make these bosses, even ones I really like, far less than they could have been with smarter design. Some earlier bosses will have very few different gimmicks and phases, and since just like the regular battles, feasible solutions to progress must always exist, you'll often be put in front of the exact same layout multiple times throughout a fight, and if it works, there's no reason to stop. So just like regular battles, if you've seen a puzzle before and solved it, there's no work to be done to create a new solution. And since these bosses are usually designed to be defeated in very specific ways, albeit you can defeat them in others, it's pretty easy to intuit how you're intended to beat some of them just based on which symbols are on the board. You're probably going to expose a weakness with a regular or Velumental attack, and then you'll have to do a ton of damage with the thousandfold arms when that weakness is exposed. It's a pretty simple loop, and despite how well the game tries to hide it and how much more fun navigating the rings are with these bosses, the bosses themselves very rarely play out in vastly different ways. Ultimately, the ring system was a really good idea that was brought down by really awful execution in its regular battles, to the point that literally paying the game to play itself is often a pretty tempting idea, as well as not taking full advantage of it in bosses. But that is just one aspect of the combat system, and it really only gets worse from here. So, once you've lined up all your enemies, you now get a chance to attack. The game treats this like its own separate phase where you can think through your attacks, choose what you want to do, and strategize, but none of that really exists. As long as you've solved the puzzle and gotten the 1.5 damage multiplier for doing so, the battle is effectively over. Yes, you do get to choose whether or not you want to jump or hammer your enemies, and if you want to use any consumable items or weapons, but ultimately none of it really matters. The game always gives you enough attacks to take out every enemy group in one turn, as long as you're using attacks that do enough damage to defeat everything at once, and chances are you're always going to have enough weapons to meet that damage threshold in every battle you do, so any tinge of thought or strategy is non-existent. The game even automatically lines up the first attack for you at the start of each round. The only thing you'd have to even think about is whether or not a specific attack would KO a given enemy. That was generally pretty easy for me to remember, for most enemies at least, but even ones I couldn't recall or were new in a given area, it didn't matter. At that point, I just used the most powerful weapon I had for the given formation, and boom, done. So yeah, even though the game doesn't show enemy HP yet again, it isn't a problem like it was in Color Splash. It doesn't even matter, since the battles are, for all intents and purposes, a formality. A forced second step after solving the puzzle to get you back onto the world map. And with the way the game is designed, there's no sense of any sort of progression, character, difficulty, or otherwise. Pretty much no matter what you do, if you're exploring around and getting items and weapons, you're always going to be able to take out every enemy encounter you come across in a single turn. And the developers knew it, which is why they included wave battles. Wave battles are just the developers developers realizing that every battle is over in one turn, and wanting to force players into at least 2 turns of puzzle solving in a battle. Once you've solved the puzzle and wiped out all the enemies, another group just shows up and you have to do the whole song and dance again, at least some of the time. Occasionally in a wave battle, a Velumental symbol will show up over an enemy. So once you solve that puzzle and take out that set of enemies, you will be forced to use the Velumental ability the next turn, no matter what. And no matter what, this ability will take out all the enemies in the second wave. Now, if you really want, you can choose to try to make the game harder on you by not picking up any HP hearts or not equipping any weapons, but really, in the regular battles at least, that doesn't make things any more difficult, just more tedious. Getting HP up hearts not only increases your health, but often your damage too, so on top of being more squishy, the chances of enemies being beaten by one attack drops considerably. Now that really only means you're guaranteed to take 2 turns, but yeah, that means more turns enemies have to wallop on you. Not that that really matters either. Now you can die, let's be clear, especially if you do choose to basically grab no HP up hearts. But honestly, your HP is so rarely an actual issue in normal play that I kind of just forgot about it for the most part. Despite how hard enemies can hit when they do attack, the amount of times it actually happened outside of bosses was so little, and happened so far in between that the game would basically have to be a survival horror with hugely limited healing resources for it to even matter. And yeah, I know this could just be a me thing and plenty of other people could be having a lot more trouble, but I feel like the more you understand the game's mechanics, the more rewarding they should be. But it feels like it's the other way around here. The only way to really have any fun or experience any challenge from how damage or HP works in this game is to do poorly. At least then you'd be able to have some level of variety, because all of these enemies do have somewhat unique attacks which you'll just never see if you don't get hit. But wait, what about those weapons I mentioned earlier? Surely those must add some level of variety and strategy, right? Well, sort of, but mostly no. There are a lot of problems with how the weapons are implemented. First is that there are basically no real variety with them. Every new type of boot or hammer just increases the damage of the same type of attack. Flashy is better than shiny, etc. All jumps attack in a line, and all hammers hit in a 2x2 square. Well, except for hurl hammers, which was the one weapon that actually had a meaningfully unique effect. They actually attack in a line, like jumps do, but do a ton more damage than jumps. The trade-off is that the hurl hammer hits enemies on the ground, so flying enemies won't be hit. These could have been the foundation for some really interesting battling mechanics, but despite everything, Paper Mario is still being polluted by the sticker star demon. Weapons are still consumable like the previous games, but they have multiple uses now, so it's totally different than just finding a bunch of consumable things in one area. Totally. And while the game tries to trick you into thinking it's not the same general system by having weapons being something you can equip before battles, you can change your equipment whenever you want in battle as well. So for all intents and purposes, weapons are just a simplified, yet more obtuse version of stickers and cards without the variety of attacks and effects that those had. But, you know, with standard hammer and jumps being in the game and weapons being overall simplified, this could have also been fun. However, another conceptual holdover from the previous 2 games broke it before it could even form. I thought Sticker Star gave out a ton of money. I thought Color Splash gave out a ton of money. But oh my god, neither of those games even hold a candle to what Origami King does, and believe it or not, this is one of the biggest missed opportunities in the game's battle system, but to understand why, we'll have to detour away from it for a bit. One of the most important things in any RPG style game to get right is its economy. You have to try to balance items, equipment, amenities, whatever, all around the amount of money a player will be getting, so no one thing is too powerful, thus negating everything else, nor are certain things so weak that buying anything but the tippy top most powerful stuff is the only sensible option. And yeah, this is very difficult. Not every game gets it right, and even some games that get it mostly right do occasionally make the wrong call on some items. But what were to happen if you had a game that didn't care about that balance at all, and was far more focused on giving the player as many shiny things as possible to make them go, ooh, shiny things? Well, then you'd get New Super Mario Bros. 2, but Origami King isn't far behind. No joke, in both my playthroughs for this video, from the start of the game to returning to Toad Town after the first confrontation with Ollie, first hour and a half or so of the game, I had over 8,000 coins. Now that isn't a problem at all if items are scaled to match that. If a mushroom was like 2,000, oh, mushrooms are only 100 coins. Mario could buy 80 mushrooms within the first hour and a half of play. And yeah, that is a pretty representative look at Origami King's economy. Beating a battle in one turn, which you should probably be doing, will usually net you around 500 coins, with wave battles and more important story fights being even more than that, on top of the thousands upon thousands you'll get from just exploring. So you should regularly have well in excess of 20,000 coins for the majority of the game, and that's even spending as much as you can on other stuff like permanent tickets to Shogun Studios or collectibles. Oh, and just as an aside, what's the point of giving out a pittance of coins as a reward after the battle ends when you've already given out literal hundreds in the battle's end screen? It's like if on payday your boss tossed you a shiny nickel as a bonus. Like, why? So that's one problem. No matter what you do, you'll be so rich that you'll never have to make any strategic purchases. Are you out of weapons? Well, then just go buy the most expensive one you have available. It will basically be the best one in every circumstance. Now let's say we cut Mario's money-making skills by 10. Not 10%, divide it by 10. Now Mario's only making 50 or so coins per battle, and suddenly each purchase he makes has way more weight, requires way more thought, because money just doesn't grow on trees, and item prices are still super high. Well, now we've got another problem. Why would Mario ever buy the shiny boots when the shiny iron boots do more damage, let him jump on spiky enemies, and only cost 100 coins more? If the balance was more interesting, like if the shiny boots did a ton more damage but shiny iron boots retained their ability to attack spiked enemies, or if there were more types of attack to add more variety, then the prices would be more justified, at least with our more reasonable income. And actually putting a meaningful limit to Mario's attacking ability in some way, be that cutting coin income or having restricted expandable weapon slots, or both, could have forced the player to use his regular attacks more. This could have forced battles to last longer, which could have let the developers balance the battle system around battles lasting more than one turn, which would in turn greatly increase the options they had when designing their ring puzzles. But instead they chose to focus on giving out as much coin dopamine as possible and making as much of their battle system as irrelevant as possible. I just want to care about the battle system. I want the game to be able to give me something to care about, but I can't bring myself to care about this game if it doesn't care, and with how poorly these mechanics mesh together, and in fact are often completely rendered obsolete by others, shows a lack of care that is almost unprecedented in this series. It's one of the most egregious examples of a system being far less than the sum of its parts, because it feels like no one ever even attempted to combine them all into a cohesive whole. Yes, the puzzle system is a fun concept. Yes, bringing back standard attacks could have fixed an issue the previous games had. Yes, the addition of equipable weapons and accessories could have led to some character building. And yes, things like the toads helping solve the puzzles could have been implemented in a smart way. But none of these systems complement each other, and a few supersede the others so completely that it's straight up better to not bother engaging with them. I hate this system because I can easily see that with some proper design and some care and thought put into it, it could have been great. But no, all we got was a bunch of different systems all doing completely different things in ways that sabotage every other one. And to me is probably my least favorite battle system in this entire franchise. And I think that after almost 4,000 words, I'm finally done talking about the battles in Origami King, and it's about time we start to wrap this up. But before that, just a few more odds and ends. One of the uses for the aforementioned accessories is finding the multitude of collectibles here. On top of toads, there are also collectible statues that you can either find around the world in chests, or can be bought from various merchants. These are nice, but funnily enough, some of them are priced hilariously high to try to justify giving out so much money. There's 120 of them in total, and they are nice little rewards for exploring. Collecting everything and completing the game 100% does give a bit of a secret ending, but we'll get into that a little bit later. There's a couple mini games which are kind of fun, nothing really special but are far from painful, and I do want to point out these little cafes that pop up a few times throughout the game. They show Mario enemies just having a break and drinking a cup of joe. I really like these areas because they do show enemies as people at least a little bit and gives them and Mario some interactions you probably wouldn't be able to see in most Mario games. And with all that done, let's wrap this thing up. This video is already way too long. So after we climb the tower in the Great Sea, we find a teleporter which takes Mario into the sky and to the place where we find the last streamer, Shangri Spa. This is a fun little area which after Bowser Jr. dies, it's up to Mario and Kamek to put him back together by visiting several rejuvenating spas. I particularly like this forest maze section where at every single crossroad, without fail, Kamek is always right. It also has the newest incarnation of Sniff It or Whiff It. Shy Guys finished last, so that's terrible, but overall it's a nice little adventure romp. Once we get past the Sumo Bros is where things really start to get moving quickly. We enter Bowser's castle with a bunch of his minions and take on the Origami Scourge that has taken it over. Once that's done, we need to go exploring around to unlock the door, and as we do, everyone gets abducted. Honestly, this is the only time where I knew the game was taking advantage of its concepts properly. The enemies that pop up are just black cutouts of people, and while, yeah, that doesn't sound too interesting, they really stand out as unique and foreboding. On top of that, they uniquely work within the ring battle system in a way that is both mechanically interesting and aesthetically sensible. The first boss here is also really unique and cool. Olivia's been taken away, so Mario can't use any Velumental powers or the Thousandfold Arms, so you have to actually experiment and find out what works and what won't in order to get her back. It's kind of a joke fight after you do, you just need to win a few games of rock paper scissors to beat the thing, but as a whole this is a really unique and fun fight that the one it directly precedes, the pair of scissors, just can't touch. And just for the record, no, I don't really care that the scissors have an OHKO attack. A lot of my favorite games have really punishing mechanics like that, so it doesn't really bother me. But with the scissors destroyed, the last streamer is broken and Peach's castle is permanently trapped on top of a mountain. All that's left to do is raid it and defeat Ollie, but there is that trapped on top of a mountain problem. Luckily, Bowser has some airships just lying around and is willing to lead the charge. And after an okay turret section where you personally shoot dozens of bob-ombs to their deaths, and a pretty climactic chase scene, Mario and Olivia make their way to the steps of Princess Peach's castle. But of course, the door is locked, and here's where Luigi makes his return. He's been around the entire game looking for the key to Peach's castle, but of course he's very blind, so every key he's found, while useful at the time, was never the one he actually wanted. It's kind of a fun gag, but it got old pretty quickly. And of course, while he's been searching the entire world for the key, it's been in his cart's exhaust pipe the whole time! This joke Bowser says about patching in the rest of the castle is genuinely hilarious though, and I do feel very called out. But Ollie isn't just going to let Mario and his team rescue Peach. Oh no, he's got another trick up his sleeve. He takes Peach's castle and refolds it in his own image, turning the entire thing into a huge origami castle, which acts as the game's final dungeon. This is a fine final dungeon as well. I wouldn't put it on par with Bowser's Castle or the Palace of Darkness, but there's a lot of good stuff here. There are some really fun puzzles, some interesting enemies, and it has our final office supplies boss, the Stapler. Once it's down, Bowser is finally free from his folded prison, and the whole team heads on to face Ollie once and for all. Ollie's final boss fight has some ups and some downs. The first phase is really just a memory check for the Velumentals. Ollie will take the form of one of them, and you'll need to use a special Velumental symbol that lets you choose which one to have Olivia turn into. Just pick the right one and you've basically won within a few turns. Phase 2 is actually pretty funny. Olivia transforms Bowser into a giant origami version of himself so he and Ollie can basically have a Rock'em Sock'em Robots fight. It's very easy, just a bunch of button mashing and some light dodging, and Ollie falls down into the abyss. But he's obviously not done yet, as he comes back bigger than ever, and there's only one thing left that can stop him. There's a special sigil that Olivia needs to use that can put an end to his plans forever, but Ollie won't just let that happen. He jumbles the sigil and it's up to Mario to put it back together properly. I don't actually hate image sliding puzzles, but they only really work when the tiles have a consistent size and shape so they can actually be solved. But here the image gets so distorted that solving it is more about remembering the order it was shuffled in than using any sort of deduction to solve it. This part of the final fight was the only time in either of my playthroughs for this video that I actually died without specifically wanting to. And since this is the only time in the entire game this sort of image puzzle is mandatory, this could very well blindside someone with a puzzle type they've never been taught how to solve. But once you do solve it within a time limit that straight up kills you if you don't fast enough, Ollie unleashes one final volley, and after a few quick time events, he's done. Olivia transforms into a giant hammer, and with Mario's help, bonks him good. Once it's over, we finally learn why Ollie's been doing all this, why he decided the world was rotten and that he had to take it upon himself to refashion it in his own image. As it turns out, Ollie wanted to take over the world because the origami craftsman wrote a message on him. A nice note of encouragement, actually. But instead of reading this in a mirror or something and knowing what it said, he took this most mundane of slights, writing on paper with a pen, and used it as his entire motivation for all his evil deeds. Man, what a letdown. I don't even think Ollie is a bad villain, all things considered. He was a genuine threat, had a lot of dangerous powers, and gave the protagonists a personal goal to achieve in defeating him. But his motivation is like genuinely on the same level as what made Black Bowser in Color Splash, but played entirely straight as opposed to Color Splash recognizing how silly the whole situation was. All that said, Ollie's questionable reasons don't ruin the ending, and it is still sad to have to see Olivia say goodbye to her brother. Before he dies, Ollie tells Olivia that he was planning on folding 1,000 cranes to get a wish, and he only had one left to go, which is convenient, as there's now a piece of square paper just lying on the floor. Olivia doesn't know how to do that, but thankfully Luigi and the origami craftsman burst in through the wall to let them fold the last crane. She does, and with this final crane, Olivia is given a wish that she uses to undo all of the destruction that Ollie caused and unfold all the origami he created. And with that, everything is returned to the way it once was. All the origami is unfolded, and even the castle is back to where it originally stood. But that wish had one grave consequence. Olivia was folded by Ollie, and in undoing all that he did, she in turn was unfolded as well. But she decided that helping Mario and being able to truly make things as they should be was more important than her survival, and she doesn't come back. The Origami Festival starts back up, and Mario and Peach send some paper lanterns as a thank you to Olivia, but her sacrifice was permanent. There is a secret ending for getting 100%, which I definitely didn't do, where the origami craftsman refolds Ollie and Olivia and places them on their origami thrones, but whether or not those are living origami is up for interpretation. I'm sure some people would be happy if they were alive, but the origami craftsman himself did say that the 1,000th crane was his final fold of life, so they could just be regular origami, and I really like that it is open for that interpretation. See this sticker star? This is how you make an ally sacrifice themselves. Olivia's sacrifice was necessary as there's no way anyone else could fix what Ollie did. Her sacrifice was meaningful as using the 1,000 cranes fulfilled Ollie's last wish, and her sacrifice was impactful. It wasn't just erased because an ending that isn't 100% happy won't fly with kids. Olivia was a great character, and Origami King's ending is genuinely bittersweet because of her loss. But what did I think about Origami King overall? Well, if you've made it all the way through this enormous video, you may think that I just despised it, that I think it's just as bad as Sticker Star and I'm firmly on the Paper Mario is dead train. But it's not nearly that simple. I think Origami King has by far the highest highs of the modern games. It really did a lot of the things that made the originals so great. It brought back some towns, it had an interconnected world that was so desperately needed, it had a genuinely great character to act as the game's emotional core, and it did try to take the game in a new, interesting direction. It's just so unfortunate that the new direction it chose was so broken. Obviously, the battle system was a big part of that, but I mean broken in a more general sense. It's clear that Intelligent Systems put a lot of effort into this, and they really wanted to make a game that would stand toe-to-toe with the franchise's greats, and yeah, there are aspects of it that easily manage that. But the problem is the people who are deciding what this series can and can't be either simply don't understand what makes Paper Mario so amazing, what makes it a series that I can get so up in arms about even 20 years after its origin, or are actively attempting to hinder its growth and success. And that, way more than one really awful battle system or some haphazard gimmicks, are what's making me so worried about this series' future. If it's not allowed to grow, all it can do is stagnate or start to die. And that truly breaks my heart, because I know what this series can be. I know how meaningful and important these games are to the people who love them, and I know that if it was actually given the chance to be what it has the potential to be, Paper Mario could be a third pillar equal to the 2D and 3D Mario platformers. But if it continues down the path it's currently on, it's going to continue to just be another Mario spin-off. Nothing important, nothing worth caring about. And that's what hurts the most, that a series that means so much to me can be seen by its creators as the type of game that you announce within a tweet, just another title to fill up a release schedule in a weak year, when it's been so much more. I have no reason to believe Paper Mario will ever just magically return to its roots, to a style that I personally like the most, and that's okay. Nintendo doesn't have to make games specifically for me, and if the new style is successful, there's no real reason for them to make any changes. But thankfully, fans of Nintendo's abandoned franchises are resilient. Just like Metroid fans made an amazing new game in a series they thought was long dead, Paper Mario fans have done the same. So I think before I close the book on this particular series, I'm going to have a look at that particular game, the one that seemingly continues where the Thousand-Year Door left off. If you've made it to the end here, I want to thank you so much for getting through this whole thing. I wouldn't have been able to get through this entire series for these videos if it weren't for the people who watch and enjoy them. You really are the best. Hopefully this is the last time I have to make a video this long, at least for a very long while, but I'm glad I did. Anyways, thanks again, and I will see you all later.